Imagine stepping into a place where every glance feels like a judgment, where before you even open your mouth, strangers have already decided who you are, what you can afford, and what your worth is. Now imagine walking into that place with nothing but quiet dignity, unaware that within minutes you will turn the entire room upside down and leave everyone in shock. The glass doors of Bristol Luxury Motors swung open with a soft chime. Sunlight spilled into the pristine showroom, bouncing off polished chrome and freshly waxed vehicles. Inside, every corner of the dealership gleamed, spotless tiles, gleaming rims, and smiling salesmen circling like hawks, each waiting to swoop in on their next high-value customer. Then she entered. An elderly black woman, her back slightly bent with age but her steps steady and sure, crossed the threshold. She was dressed simply, a faded blue dress that had seen many summers, sensible shoes, and a small, well-worn purse clutched gently in her hand. To anyone else, she might have looked like someone's grandmother on her way to the grocery store, not someone stepping into one of the most expensive dealerships in town. The moment she appeared, the energy shifted. Conversations dulled. One salesman's eyes flicked toward her and then away again, as though she didn't belong in the frame of his ambition. Another nudged his colleague, whispering under his breath, and they shared a short, dismissive laugh. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes, calm yet observant, scanned the showroom with quiet curiosity. She didn't hurry. Every step was deliberate, measured, as though she knew exactly where she was going. From across the room, Daniel, the top salesman of the dealership, adjusted his tie and smirked. He had been waiting for a serious buyer all afternoon, the kind who would drop 6 figures without blinking. And here she was, a woman who, by the look of her, didn't even drive the kind of cars parked outside, let alone buy them. Still, professionalism came first. With a plastic smile fixed firmly on his face, Daniel approached. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said smoothly, though his tone carried the faintest trace of impatience. "Can I help you?" The woman gave a polite nod. "Yes. I'd like to test drive that one." She pointed at a gleaming pearl-white luxury sedan, the newest model on display, priced higher than most homes in the city. For a moment, Daniel froze. Then, almost involuntarily, his lips curled upward again, but this time into a smirk rather than a smile. "That one?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Ma'am, that's one of our premium models. Are you sure that's what you want to look at?" The woman didn't break her gaze. "Yes, that one." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, sensing a couple of his colleagues watching from the corner, stifling laughter. He cleared his throat, deciding to set boundaries. "Ma'am, these cars aren't for, window shopping. They're serious investments. Perhaps I could show you something else? Maybe something a little more affordable?" The woman's calm never wavered. She tilted her head slightly, her tone even, almost gentle. "I didn't ask for affordable," she said softly. "I asked for a test drive." The words landed heavier than expected, but Daniel brushed them off. He was already convinced she wasn't worth his time. "I'm afraid I can't arrange that right now," he said quickly, gesturing toward the door. "We've got appointments with serious buyers. Maybe you can come back another time." Another time. Another place. Another dismissal. Her lips pressed into the faintest smile. Not bitter, not angry, just knowing. She gave a small nod, adjusted the strap of her purse, and without a single complaint, turned to leave. The salesman near the counter exchanged glances, whispering again. One of them muttered, "What was she thinking walking in here?" Another chuckled under his breath, already returning to his computer screen, dismissing her as quickly as she had appeared. But outside, as the woman stepped into the warm afternoon sun, she paused for just a moment. Her hand rested briefly on her purse, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as if replaying the scene in her mind. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet fire, a spark that hinted at something no one inside that dealership could have predicted. She walked across the parking lot slowly, every step echoing with patience. To those inside, she was gone, forgotten. But they had no idea that within the next few minutes this same woman would return, not as a dismissed customer, but as the most powerful person in the building. And when she did, their laughter would turn into silence. The sunlight outside reflected sharply off the dealership's polished windows, making it impossible for anyone inside to see what the elderly woman was doing in the parking lot. To the salesman, she had already become a fleeting memory, just another visitor who didn't fit their vision of a wealthy buyer. Inside, Daniel straightened his tie once more, brushing off the brief encounter as nothing more than a distraction. "Back to business," he muttered, scanning the entrance for his next potential client. His colleagues nodded in agreement, already shifting their attention toward a young couple browsing near the sports cars. The showroom returned to its rhythm, papers shuffling, keys jingling, muffled laughter floating between desks. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. The elderly woman's quiet presence had left a mark, though none of them recognized it yet. Meanwhile, just a few feet away in the parking lot, the woman walked steadily toward a black SUV parked near the far end. The vehicle looked out of place among the flashy sports cars and luxury sedans lined up near the entrance. Its design was understated, but its shine revealed it was far from ordinary. Two men stepped out as she approached. Both were dressed in tailored suits, their posture sharp, their demeanor professional. They greeted her with quiet respect, one of them opening the door for her while the other handed her a slim leather folder. She accepted it without a word, only glancing at the papers inside before nodding. To anyone watching from inside, it might have looked like a routine meeting. But the truth was far from routine. Back in the showroom, Daniel was mid-conversation with a new customer when the glass doors swung open again. The familiar sound of the chime rang out, and every head turned instinctively toward the entrance. It was her. The elderly woman had returned, but this time she wasn't alone. She walked between the two suited men as if they were her silent shadows. Their steps were precise, purposeful, commanding enough to shift the atmosphere of the entire room. Daniel blinked, almost not believing what he saw. "Her again?" he muttered under his breath, forcing a smile as his customer glanced curiously at the unexpected return. He excused himself quickly and stepped forward, eager to send her away before she disrupted anything further. "Ma'am," he began, his voice lower this time. "I thought we made it clear earlier. If you're not here to purchase—" Before he could finish, one of the suited men stepped slightly forward, his expression firm. The weight of his presence silenced Daniel mid-sentence. The elderly woman, however, remained calm, her gaze fixed. Not on Daniel, but on the dealership manager who had now emerged from his office after noticing the unusual scene. The manager, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, approached cautiously. He was used to difficult situations, demanding clients, competitive salesmen, financial disputes, but something about this moment felt different. There was no chaos, no shouting, yet an undeniable tension filled the air. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice steady but carrying an authority that demanded attention. "I believe we need to talk." The manager frowned slightly, glancing at Daniel, who looked flustered and unsure. Then his eyes drifted to the leather folder in her hand, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, concern, a dawning realization he could not yet voice. "Of course," he said quickly, masking his unease with a professional smile. "Why don't we step into my office?" The woman walked ahead without hesitation, her two companions close behind. The staff and customers in the showroom exchanged confused glances, whispering in low tones. Daniel, left standing near the counter, felt a knot tighten in his chest. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself she couldn't possibly be more than a lawyer or a business associate making empty threats. But a part of him knew, deep down, that he had miscalculated. Inside the office, the manager closed the door gently behind them. The woman placed her folder on the polished wooden desk and opened it carefully. The documents inside bore official seals, signatures, and legal markings that were impossible to ignore. She slid the first page forward. "I believe this should make everything clear," she said, her tone calm yet firm. The manager's eyes scanned the page, his expression tightening with each line he read. Ownership contracts, shares, transfers of authority. Her name was printed clearly at the bottom. He looked up slowly, his throat dry. This can't be right." The woman met his gaze steadily. "It's not only right," she replied softly. "It's already done." Back in the showroom, Daniel tried to carry on as usual, but his nerves betrayed him. His mind replayed every word, every dismissive gesture, every smirk he had given the woman only minutes earlier. The memory grew heavier with each passing second, filling him with a discomfort he couldn't shake. He didn't know it yet, but his life, and the dealership's future, was about to be rewritten. The manager finally leaned back in his chair, setting the papers down carefully, as though handling something fragile. He looked at the woman with a mixture of disbelief and newfound respect. "You're telling me you're the new majority owner?" he asked quietly. The woman gave the faintest smile, one that carried more power than any raised voice could. "I'm not telling you," she corrected. "I'm showing you at E." That very moment, the office door opened, and the sound of her calm words echoed faintly into the showroom. A hush fell over the staff as they caught fragments of the conversation. The elderly woman had not come back as a dismissed customer. She had returned as something else entirely, and though no one fully understood it yet, within the next few minutes, the dealership would never be the same again. The door to the manager's office clicked softly shut, but the quiet inside the showroom felt louder than ever. Staff members who moments earlier had been laughing and talking now moved uneasily. Even customers sensed something unusual, their conversations dipping into whispers as they glanced toward the frosted glass door. Daniel paced near the counter, his polished shoes clicking nervously against the showroom floor. He tried to reassure himself. She couldn't possibly be serious. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she's bluffing. But the image of her calm, steady eyes wouldn't leave him. Unlike most who argued or demanded, she had never raised her voice. That quiet certainty unsettled him far more than anger ever could. Inside the office, the elderly woman sat comfortably, hands folded over the leather folder now resting on the desk. Across from her, the manager leaned forward, scanning every line of the documents with a growing sense of inevitability. "Majority ownership transfer," he murmured under his breath, tracing the signature with his finger. "Executed, finalized, recorded with the state." His eyes flicked upward toward her, filled with disbelief. "And you're the name on those papers," she finished gently, sparing him from stumbling through the obvious. "Yes, I am." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The suited men at her side remained still, their presence a quiet shield of authority. Finally, the manager exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Why didn't you say something when you walked in earlier?" The woman's expression softened, though her voice carried weight. "Respect isn't something I should have to announce. It's something that should be given freely. What I experienced out there tells me much about how this place has been run." The manager shifted uncomfortably, knowing she was right. He could already picture the ripple this would cause, not just among the staff, but in the community once the story spread. "Would you like me to gather the employees?" he asked cautiously. She nodded once. Yes, it's time they understood the truth. When the office door opened, every head turned. The elderly woman stepped out first, her posture unchanged, steady, graceful, commanding without effort. Behind her, the manager followed, carrying the folder that contained the undeniable truth. The room grew silent. The laughter that had once filled the space was gone. Even the faint hum of background music seemed to fade as anticipation tightened the air. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand tall. "So, what's going on?" he asked, his voice wobbling just enough to betray his nerves. The manager glanced at him, then at the rest of the staff. His tone was firm, his words deliberate. "I need everyone's attention. This woman is not a visitor. She is not here to browse. She is the new majority owner of Bristol Luxury Motors." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed across the room. One employee dropped a pen, the sound sharp in the silence. Customers looked around in confusion, trying to piece together the scene unfolding before them. Daniel's face went pale. His polished confidence evaporated in an instant, replaced with disbelief. "Wait. What?" he stammered. "That's impossible. She just came in asking for a test drive. You can't be serious." The manager held up the folder, flipping it open for all to see. "These are the signed and sealed documents. It's real. As of this morning, she owns a controlling interest in this dealership." The woman said nothing at first. She let the weight of the truth settle in the room, let every dismissive glance and mocking whisper come back to haunt those who had made them. Finally, she stepped forward, her voice calm but resonant. "When I walked in earlier, I was treated as if I didn't belong, as if respect should be reserved only for those who look like money. But now, perhaps you understand. Worth cannot be judged by appearance. It lies in character, in dignity, in resilience, and sometimes it lies in silence, the silence that waits until the right moment to reveal the truth." Daniel tried to find his voice, but every word felt heavy. I didn't mean—" She looked directly at him, her gaze neither cruel nor forgiving, simply steady. "It isn't about what you meant. It's about what you chose to show me. Remember this. Every person who steps through these doors deserves respect, not assumptions." His shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. Around him, other employees shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping across their faces. One of the customers, a middle-aged man who had been browsing a sports car moments earlier, spoke up quietly. "I've bought cars here for years," he said, looking around the room. "And I've felt that same attitude. Maybe it took her to make a change." The woman inclined her head toward him in acknowledgement, then turned her gaze back to the staff. "This place has the potential to be more than a showroom. It can be a place of trust, of dignity, but only if those within it learn to see beyond the surface." The tension in the room broke not with applause or cheers, but with silence, a silence thicker, heavier, and more meaningful than any sound could have been. It was the silence of realization, of shame, of recognition that something had shifted forever. Daniel lowered his eyes, unable to meet hers any longer. The arrogance that had fueled his every gesture was gone, replaced by the sting of humility. And though no one said it aloud, everyone understood. The woman who had been pushed out the door only minutes earlier now stood as the force that would redefine everything about this dealership. Outside, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the woman where she stood. To the world, she still looked like someone's grandmother, gentle, quiet, unassuming. But inside the dealership, she had become something far more powerful, a reminder that respect must never be measured by appearance, and that underestimating someone could cost you everything, and this was only the beginning. The air in the dealership hung heavy, as though the very walls were holding their breath. The salesman, once quick to laugh and smirk, now stood frozen in place. The customers lingered, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond a routine business transaction. The elderly woman stood calmly in the center of the room, Her presence was quiet but undeniable, her voice unshaken when she finally spoke. "Respect," she said softly, "isn't something that comes with a price tag. It is the one thing every human being deserves the moment they walk into a room." Yet here, I was asked to leave before I even finished my first sentence. Her words spread across the room like ripples on still water. No one dared interrupt. Even Daniel, who had always thrived on quick replies and clever comebacks, found himself speechless. The manager cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am." "I mean, Madam Owner," he stammered. The staff didn't know. If they had... She raised her hand gently, silencing him without force. That's exactly the point. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. One of the younger employees, a trainee who had only been with the dealership for a month, shifted uncomfortably and raised his hand slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice trembling. "I should have stepped in. I saw how they treated you, and I didn't say anything." The woman's gaze softened for the first time. "Courage," she told him, "doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a whisper, a choice to stand beside what's right even when it's difficult. Remember that. Next time, use your voice." The young man nodded quickly, his cheeks flushed, but his eyes brighter than before. Daniel, still pale and stiff, finally found words. I was only doing my job. We get people all the time who come in and waste our time. I didn't mean any harm." The woman turned her full attention to him. Her eyes did not burn with anger, but their calm steadiness cut deeper than any raised voice could. "Intent does not erase impact. Your laughter may have felt small to you, but to me, it was a door slammed in my face. You saw only what you wanted to see, and you decided who I was before I even had a chance to show you." Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time in his career, words failed him completely. The woman then looked at the customers who were still standing nearby, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I don't intend to embarrass anyone here," she said gently. "But I want this place to change. This dealership will no longer be about who looks like they belong. It will be about making sure everyone who walks in these doors feels valued." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. One of the customers, the same man who had spoken earlier, nodded firmly. "It's about time," he said under his breath, loud enough for others to hear. The woman inclined her head in gratitude. "This is not just about selling cars. It is about trust. Without trust, business is just numbers. But with it, business becomes relationships. That's what I intend to build here." The manager, still holding the folder of ownership documents, stepped closer to her. "What would you like us to do first?" he asked. She took a slow breath, her eyes sweeping the room. "First," she said, "I want a meeting with every staff member today. Everyone, from sales to service. This will not be about punishment. It will be about learning, about understanding. We will talk about respect, about dignity, about how we treat people. And if anyone feels they cannot embrace that, then perhaps they are in the wrong business." The staff shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to argue. Even Daniel lowered his eyes, knowing there was no defense against her words. "Second," she continued, her voice firm, "I want this dealership to open its doors to the community. Too long it has stood as a fortress of glass and steel, a place people pass by but never enter. That ends now. This place will hold events, invite families, and prove that luxury doesn't mean exclusion. Luxury should mean excellence. Excellence in kindness, in service, in integrity." Her words were powerful, yet they carried no bitterness. They were not about revenge. They were about transformation. One of the customers clapped softly, almost hesitantly, and soon others joined in. It wasn't loud applause. It was steady, genuine, and filled with respect. For the first time, the dealership floor felt alive with something other than sales pitches and rehearsed smiles. It felt alive with truth. The woman didn't bask in it. She simply nodded and said, "Thank you. But applause is not what will change this place. Action will. As the crowd began to disperse, staff returning to their desks with heavy but thoughtful expressions, the woman walked slowly toward the very car she had first pointed at. The pearl-white sedan gleamed under the showroom lights, just as it had when she entered the first time. She placed her hand gently on its hood, her fingers tracing the polished surface. Daniel, watching from a distance, felt a lump form in his throat. Only minutes ago, he had dismissed her interest in that car as laughable. Now, seeing her touch it as the owner of the dealership, the weight of his mistake hit him like a stone. The woman turned back to face the staff and customers one final time. Her eyes shone with quiet strength. "I didn't come here today to buy a car," she said softly. "I came to remind this place, and perhaps even myself, that true ownership isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in how we carry ourselves and how we treat others." The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was reverent. What had started as a humiliating dismissal had turned into a revelation that none of them would forget. And though the papers in the folder made her the legal owner, it was her words, her dignity, and her grace that made her the true leader of that dealership. And in the quiet of that moment, everyone knew the story of this place was only just beginning. The clock ticked past 5 in the evening, yet no one in the dealership moved to go home. Word had spread quickly through every corner of the building, from sales to service, from finance to the janitorial staff. Everyone was summoned into the main showroom for an all-hands meeting. The cars, once the centerpiece of the room, now felt like silent witnesses, their gleaming hoods reflecting the uneasy faces of those gathered. Salesmen leaned against desks, mechanics still in oil-stained uniforms stood near the back, and office staff shuffled nervously with clipboards pressed against their chests. At the center of it all stood the elderly woman, her calm presence holding the room steady like the eye of a storm. She looked around slowly, meeting each pair of eyes with quiet certainty. The manager stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "You've all heard bits and pieces by now, but let me make it official. As of this morning, Mrs. Evelyn Carter is the new majority owner of Bristol Luxury Motors." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Even those who had already guessed gasped softly, as though hearing it aloud cemented the reality. Evelyn, for the first time her name was spoken, lifted her hand gently. "Thank you," she said to the manager, then turned to the employees. "I didn't plan on introducing myself this way, but sometimes life chooses moments for us." Daniel stood near the front, his jaw tight, his hands fidgeting against his sides. He could feel the weight of every eye flicking toward him. After all, everyone had witnessed his dismissal of her earlier. He wanted to disappear, but instead, he had no choice but to stand and listen. Evelyn's voice, though soft, carried across the room with surprising strength. "When I walked through these doors this afternoon, I wasn't treated as a guest. I wasn't treated as a human being deserving of respect. I was treated as a distraction, a waste of time." Several employees lowered their heads, some shuffled their feet. "And yet," she continued, "I said nothing. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply walked out. But I came back because I believe this place can be more than what I saw. That's why I'm here. Not just as your new employer, but as someone who believes change is possible." One of the mechanics raised his hand timidly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough from years in the garage, "most of us, we don't act like that. We work hard, we treat customers right, but we've seen how some of the sales team handle people, and we never said anything. That's on us too." Evelyn nodded. "Accountability is not about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing where we failed and choosing to do better next time. Silence in the face of wrong is its own kind of action." The words stung, but they also rang true. A quiet murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. Daniel could no longer hold back. He stepped forward, his voice tense. "Mrs. Carter, I admit I was wrong earlier. I judged you, but I swear I treat most of my clients with respect. I've closed some of the biggest deals in this place. My record—" "Your record," Evelyn interrupted, "is numbers, but numbers don't measure integrity. Tell me, Daniel, if I had walked in here dressed differently, if I had looked the way you expected a wealthy customer to look, would you have laughed? Would you have dismissed me?" Daniel froze, the truth clawing at him. His lips parted, but no words came. "That silence," Evelyn said gently, "is your answer. And that silence is what we must break." The room shifted uneasily. For the first time, Daniel, the star salesman, the man who always had something clever to say, stood defeated, unable to defend himself. Evelyn turned back to the crowd. "This dealership has been built on the idea of selling luxury. But real luxury is not leather seats and shiny paint. Real luxury is dignity. It's the feeling a customer has when they know they are valued no matter who they are. That is what we will sell from this day forward." A few employees nodded. Some even clapped softly. The idea struck deeper than any motivational speech they had heard before. "And let me be clear," Evelyn continued, "if anyone here believes they cannot work with that vision, if respect feels like too much to give, then this may not be the place for you. I will not run a business that profits from arrogance." The challenge hung in the air like a test. No one moved. No one left. But the weight of her words settled on their shoulders, reshaping how they thought of their jobs. At that moment, a woman from the finance office stepped forward. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "Mrs. Carter, I want to thank you. I've worked here for 6 years, and I've seen customers walk out of this dealership humiliated because they were judged before they even had a chance to speak. It always broke my heart, but I felt powerless to change it. Now, I believe we can." Evelyn smiled faintly. "We can, but only if we do it together." The tension in the room began to soften, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of unity. Employees exchanged glances, some ashamed, some hopeful. Even Daniel, still stiff and pale, lowered his head in reluctant acknowledgement. Evelyn let the silence linger a moment longer before she delivered her final words. "This is the showdown. Not between you and me, not between sales and service, but between the way things have always been and the way they must be. The question is simple. Which side do you want to stand on?" The room was still, but deep inside something had shifted. The old ways had been exposed and a new path had been laid before them. Whether they embraced it or not would define the future of Bristol Luxury Motors. The next morning, the dealership looked the same from the outside. Rows of polished cars glimmered in the morning sun, and the glass doors reflected the early rush of traffic passing by. But inside, there was a different air, one heavy with uncertainty, yet quietly charged with possibility. Employees filed in, glancing at one another with guarded expressions. They had all heard Evelyn's words the night before, and though she had given no ultimatums beyond respect and accountability, the message was still ringing in their ears. Things will not be the same. Evelyn arrived just before 9. She didn't pull up in a luxury vehicle, but in the same modest sedan she had driven the day she was dismissed. She stepped out, carrying no briefcase, no entourage, just herself. That simplicity alone made many pause. Inside, she walked slowly through the showroom. Every conversation hushed slightly as she passed, but she didn't seem to notice. Instead, she paused in front of a receptionist who was answering the phone. Evelyn smiled warmly and waited until the call was over. "Good morning," she said. "How long have you been here?" "5 years, ma'am," the receptionist replied, startled by the personal question. And how many times has anyone asked you what you'd change about this place? Evelyn asked. The receptionist blinked. Honestly, never. Evelyn nodded, as if she had expected that answer. Well, today is the first time. Write it down. Whatever you believe would make this place better, big or small. I want to hear it. The receptionist's eyes lit up, and a small murmur passed among the staff who overheard. Evelyn wasn't starting with speeches this time. She was starting with listening. By noon, she had quietly visited every department, sales, finance, service, even the janitorial closet. She didn't ask about profits or productivity charts. She asked about people. She asked about frustrations, about how customers were treated, about what made employees proud and what made them uneasy. For the first time, employees felt seen. Some were skeptical, whispering that maybe this was just a tactic to win them over. But others, especially those who had worked in the shadows for years without recognition, felt something shift. Later in the day, Evelyn called a smaller meeting, not of all employees this time, but of the leadership team, department heads, senior salespeople, and the finance manager. They sat around the long conference table, with Daniel reluctantly included. He avoided her eyes, still raw from the humiliation of the previous evening. Evelyn began calmly. We are not here to point fingers again. We are here to create a foundation, a new culture. A business cannot survive if customers walk away feeling less human than when they arrived. So I need each of you to help me redefine what success means. Here. The finance manager spoke first. Success has always meant numbers, closing deals, hitting targets. That's how we've been trained. Then it's time to retrain, Evelyn said firmly. From today on, success will mean two things: dignity for customers and pride for employees. Numbers will follow if we do that right. The room was silent. It was a bold shift, but the conviction in her tone left no room for doubt. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, I can't deny I made a mistake with you, but I also can't deny that I've brought millions in sales to this place. If I have to slow down for every customer, I'll close fewer deals. That's just reality. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady. No, Daniel, that's fear speaking. Do you think I'm asking you to sell less? I'm asking you to sell differently. When you treat customers with dignity, they don't just buy cars. They bring their friends, their family, their loyalty. That multiplies sales more than any flashy pitch ever will. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but several others nodded in agreement. Evelyn then introduced her first concrete change. From now on, every sale will include a customer satisfaction follow-up call made by management, not to sell anything but to ask if they felt respected. If the answer is no, we will investigate and we will act. This is non-negotiable. The service manager raised a brow. That could get messy. Messy, Evelyn replied, is better than silent. The weight of her words pressed into the room again. Slowly, resistance began to soften into reluctant acceptance. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the dealership had begun to evolve. Employees whispered less about fear of change and more about curiosity. What would it feel like to work in a place where kindness mattered? Could this really become something different? Some younger salespeople even seemed energized. One was overheard telling a colleague, "If we do this right, we'll be the only dealership in the city with this kind of reputation. People will line up." Meanwhile, the receptionist who had been asked for suggestions earlier left a note on Evelyn's desk. What if we had a small lounge with water and coffee for customers waiting? Nothing fancy, just something to make them comfortable. Evelyn smiled when she read it. Small steps. That was how transformation always began. Before closing time, Evelyn gathered the employees once more in the showroom. She didn't stand on a platform. She stood among them. Today was just the beginning, she said. I don't expect everything to change overnight, But I do expect effort. I do expect heart. And if we give those things, this place will not only thrive financially, but become something rare, a business people trust. That is our new luxury." There was no applause, no cheer, not yet. But there was a shift in the air, a cautious respect. The first stones of a new foundation had been laid, and as the doors closed that evening, Evelyn walked out alone into the cooling air, knowing the hardest part was yet to come. She had shown them the path. Whether they walked it with her remained to be seen. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the dealership began to take on a new rhythm. At first, the changes Evelyn Carter introduced were subtle. Customer follow-up calls, a small lounge with coffee and water, and a clear expectation that every person who walked through the doors should leave feeling valued. But the ripples of those changes spread wider and faster than anyone could have predicted. Within a month, customers were already noticing. One wrote a glowing review online, praising the warmth of the staff and the way they felt treated like family. Another described how, for the first time in years, a car salesman had actually listened to her concerns instead of pushing her into a decision. Reviews began piling up. 5 stars, heartfelt words, photos of smiling families with their new cars. For a business long defined by cold transactions and slick deals, it was nothing short of a transformation. And at the center of it all stood Evelyn, steady, calm, and determined. Yet not everyone was convinced. Daniel remained a storm beneath the surface. Though he complied with the new systems, he made it clear he wasn't fully bought in. He still believed speed and pressure were the true engines of sales. To him, Evelyn's vision was noble but impractical. One evening, after another long day, he confronted her privately. "You've changed this place," he admitted, his tone somewhere between respect and resentment. "But answer me this, Mrs. Carter. Are you doing this because you love this dealership or because you want to prove a point after what I did?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She met his eyes with the same calm strength that had carried her this far. "Daniel," she said softly, "I'm not here to prove you wrong. I'm here to prove kindness right. There's a difference." Her words landed like a stone in water, rippling through him in ways he couldn't show. He didn't respond, but something in his gaze shifted. A crack in the armor he had worn, so tightly. By the second month, sales were rising. Not just slightly, but significantly. Families returned with relatives, co-workers referred friends, and word spread that Evelyn's dealership was different. People drove across town, passing other showrooms, just to buy from her team. Employees who had once felt overlooked now carried themselves with pride. The receptionist, whose simple idea for a coffee lounge had been implemented, beamed every time she saw customers relax with a cup of tea. Service staff reported that customers were kinder to them too. Respect had become contagious. Even Daniel couldn't argue with the numbers. His commissions held steady, but the difference was in the faces of the people he sold to. Instead of strained smiles, customers shook his hand with genuine gratitude. For the first time, he began to wonder if Evelyn's way wasn't just moral. Maybe it was smarter, too. The turning point came 3 months later. A local journalist, tipped off by the wave of glowing reviews, arrived to interview Evelyn. The article that followed hit the front page of the business section, From Rejection to Redemption: How One Woman Transformed a Dealership with Dignity. The piece detailed Evelyn's story, the day she was turned away, her unexpected rise as owner, and the sweeping changes she had made. It painted her not just as a business leader, but as a symbol of resilience and grace. The article went viral. Social media lit up with shares, comments, and praise. Strangers wrote that they wished their own workplaces had leaders like her. Others admitted they had tears in their eyes reading her journey. Suddenly, Evelyn wasn't just leading a dealership. She was inspiring a city. But for Evelyn, the recognition wasn't the victory. The true triumph was what happened one Saturday morning. She arrived early to find a young woman waiting nervously outside the showroom. The woman explained that she was fresh out of college with no experience, but she wanted to apply for a job because she had heard this was a place where people cared. Evelyn felt her heart swell. This was the legacy she had dreamed of, not just selling cars, but attracting people who believed in dignity and respect as much as she did. She hired the young woman on the spot, promising to train her personally. Even Daniel, the last stronghold of resistance, reached his breaking point. It happened one evening when an elderly couple came in, nervous about buying a new car. They admitted they had been taken advantage of at another dealership, left with a vehicle they didn't understand and payments they couldn't afford. Daniel began his usual pitch, but something stopped him. He looked at their anxious faces and, for the first time, saw a reflection of Evelyn that day she was turned away. The memory hit him like a weight. The shame of what he had done, the grace she had shown him instead of revenge. Instead of rushing them, Daniel slowed down. He explained options patiently, broke down the financing in simple terms, and even encouraged them to take a day to think before committing. The couple returned 2 days later, smiling, ready to buy. They specifically asked for Daniel because, they said, he treated us like family. When they left, Daniel sat alone at his desk, staring at the signed contract. For the first time in years, he didn't just feel like a salesman. He felt like a human being. That night, he found Evelyn before she left. His voice was quiet, stripped of pride. "You were right," he admitted. "Not about the numbers. About the people. I didn't see it before. But I see it now." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then, Daniel, you've finally become what this place needed all along." Months later, the dealership wasn't just profitable, it was thriving beyond imagination. It became known as a model of ethical business, even drawing attention from larger corporations curious about Evelyn's leadership style. Employees stayed longer, customers returned more often, and the community rallied around the woman who had once been rejected at those very doors. And yet, through all the success, Evelyn never lost her humility. She still drove the same modest sedan, still walked the showroom floor each morning, still asked her staff, "What would you change today?" One evening, long after the last customer had left, Evelyn stood alone in the quiet showroom. She gazed at the polished cars reflecting the warm light overhead. Her journey had begun with humiliation and pain, but it had ended with hope and renewal. She thought of her late husband, who had always told her, "Dignity is wealth no one can take from you." And she smiled, knowing she had turned his words into reality, not just for herself, but for everyone who crossed her path. As the lights dimmed and the dealership closed for the night, Evelyn Carter locked the doors behind her. She didn't just own a business now, she owned a legacy born not from anger but from grace, not from power but from compassion. And that legacy, like her story, would echo far beyond those glass doors, a reminder to the world that even the deepest rejection can bloom into the most powerful redemption.